Is Wilson Ochuka. Now, we begin the bulletin tonight with the developing story in the neighboring country, Uganda. Millions of Ugandans took to the polling stations to elect their next president in an exercise that was marred with extensive late opening of polls amidst widespread technological failures. Several polling stations reported failing voter identification devices, forcing electoral officials to revert to manual identification of voters using printed registers. Opposition presidential candidate Robert Changulanyi, alias Bobi Wine, has claimed that the machine's failures were a deliberate attempt by the ruling party to manipulate the votes to the benefit of incumbent President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who seeks a seventh five-year term. President Museveni says despite early morning glitches, voter identification machines were functioning properly during the day. At this hour, vote counting is underway across Uganda, with vote tallying and collation expected in the coming days.
On to other updates. Uganda's presidential election has been shadowed by a hardening internet crackdown there, and this comes ahead of the voting as the president seeks to extend his four-decade rule with a seventh term. In fact, the government maintains that the blackout is to prevent misinformation. It has previously dismissed claims about the internet shutdown, saying the reports are false and misleading. Web monitor NetBlocks confirmed a nationwide disruption, and opposition supporters have been detained, foreign media kept out. The critics have called it a digital tactic designed to control the narrative at a decisive moment. The leader recently held his final campaign rally as a grand show of power, yet a tightly controlled one. Thousands filled up the National Ceremonial Gardens, but foreign journalists reportedly were not welcome, and they were denied access to the rally, reportedly somewhat threatened with arrest. The 81-year-old has been in power for 40 years and is seeking yet another term. He is widely expected to win, and he maintains total control over the state and the security apparatus, and has allegedly rewritten the rules, scrapped term and age limits, and jailed rivals to stay in power, allegedly.
Anybody who tries to interfere with your freedom will be crushed. I'm telling you this.
And the face of the opposition, meanwhile, also has been creating a lot of buzz. Also, as Uganda expects to start commercial crude oil production later this year, Wine has also campaigned on the promise to revise international agreements. He has attested that security forces blocked from campaigning in certain areas and that hundreds of his supporters have been detained. Listen to this.
Now on to our final story. Just 48 hours away from a general election, Ugandan authorities have cut internet access and limited mobile services across the country. Tomorrow, Uganda goes to the polls. 81-year-old Yoweri Museveni is aiming to extend his 40-year rule. His main opposition, pop star turned politician Bobi Wine. It is a repeat of the 2021 election when both men faced up against each other. That was marred with violence and allegations of electoral fraud. And this time around, opposition figures and rights groups had warned over the potential internet cutoff. On Tuesday, those fears were confirmed.
Public internet traffic, which has been blocked, includes social media platforms, web browsing, video streaming, personal email services, and messaging applications, among others.
And Ugandan authorities justified this internet shutdown as legitimate.
The internet restriction directed is in line with a legitimate purpose, that is protecting national security, public safety, and public order.
Uganda's nationwide internet blackout came on the eve of a highly contested national election, a moment when information, communication, and visibility matter most. By sunrise, the shutdown had become impossible to ignore. Journalists could not file reports. Election observers struggled to coordinate. Ordinary citizens, accustomed to using their phones for banking, transport, and work, found themselves abruptly cut off. Within hours, the decision had travelled far beyond Uganda's borders, triggering swift reaction from diplomats, rights groups, and international institutions. At the United Nations in New York, the response was unusually direct. In a strongly worded statement, UN officials expressed alarm over the blackout, warning that shutting down the internet during elections undermines transparency, restricts freedom of expression, and risks eroding public trust in democratic processes. The message was clear: digital shutdowns are no longer seen as internal technical decisions, but as political acts with global consequences. Uganda's government defended the move, arguing that the blackout was necessary to maintain public order and national security. Officials cited the risk of misinformation, incitement, and foreign interference, insisting that temporary restrictions were justified to preserve stability. Similar explanations have been offered in past elections, both in Uganda and elsewhere across the continent. But critics argue that such justifications have become increasingly predictable. Over the past decade, internet shutdowns have emerged as a recurring feature of elections in parts of Africa and beyond. From Ethiopia to Sudan, from Zimbabwe to Nigeria's regional shutdowns, governments have repeatedly reached for the same tool at moments of political tension. What was once exceptional has become familiar, and that familiarity is now drawing sharper scrutiny. The UN's intervention reflects a broader shift in how the international community views digital access. Connectivity is no longer treated as a luxury or convenience. It is increasingly framed as a fundamental component of civic participation. Elections, observers argue, cannot be fully free or fair if voters are denied access to information, communication, and real-time reporting. In Uganda, that debate carries particular weight. President Yoweri Museveni has ruled the country for decades, presiding over a political system that blends electoral competition with tight state control. Elections are held regularly, but opposition parties and civil society groups have long raised concerns about restrictions on campaigning, media access, and assembly. Internet blackouts, critics say, fit into a wider pattern. For opposition supporters, the shutdown was seen less as a security measure and more as a signal. Without the internet, mobilization becomes harder. Documentation becomes slower. Allegations of irregularities become more difficult to circulate. In an age where videos, live streams, and instant updates shape public perception, silence can be powerful. The economic impact was immediate. Uganda's growing digital economy, built around mobile money, e-commerce, and online services, ground to a halt. Small businesses lost transactions. Freelancers missed deadlines. Ride-hailing apps stopped working. For many, the blackout carried a cost that extended far beyond politics. Banks and telecom companies quietly acknowledged the disruption, even as official messaging focused on calm and order. In Kampala and other urban centers, frustration simmered. For younger Ugandans in particular, many of whom have never known a world without mobile connectivity, the shutdown felt like a step backwards. International observers were watching closely. Election monitoring missions rely heavily on digital communication to coordinate teams, report findings, and respond quickly to incidents. With the internet offline, their ability to assess conditions in real time was severely constrained. Some missions issued cautious statements, noting the limitations imposed by the blackout while stopping short of outright condemnation. The UN did not. By publicly criticizing the shutdown, the organization placed Uganda's decision within a global framework of digital rights. It echoed earlier UN resolutions affirming that the same rights people have offline must also be protected online, including freedom of expression and access to information. Ugandan officials rejected the criticism, framing it as external interference in domestic affairs. They pointed to similar actions taken by governments elsewhere, including outside Africa, arguing that Uganda was being unfairly singled out. The tension between sovereignty and international norms was on full display. Yet the spotlight was already fixed. Social media platforms outside the country filled with messages from Ugandans using virtual private networks, or VPNs, to bypass restrictions. Hashtags related to the shutdown began trending internationally. Diaspora communities amplified concerns, drawing media attention in Europe and North America. For the UN, the issue went beyond Uganda alone. Internet shutdowns are increasingly viewed as a test case for how democracies adapt to the digital age. While governments worry about misinformation and unrest, rights advocates argue that shutting down networks often does more harm than good. Studies have shown that blackouts can fuel rumors, increase anxiety, and damage economies, while doing little to prevent unrest. In Uganda's case, the blackout also revived memories of previous elections, when similar restrictions were imposed. Each time, authorities promised that access would be restored quickly. Each time, the underlying questions returned. Can elections be truly transparent in the absence of digital scrutiny? Can citizens make informed choices without access to independent news? And who decides when security outweighs freedom? As polling day approached, uncertainty hung over the country. Without live streams or instant updates, information traveled slowly, often by word of mouth. State broadcasters urged calm and emphasized order. Opposition figures attempted to reassure supporters, even as their ability to communicate was sharply limited. The silence itself became part of the story. International markets took note as well. Investors, already cautious about political risk, view internet shutdowns as a red flag. Digital disruptions signal unpredictability, and unpredictability carries a price. Analysts warned that repeated blackouts could undermine Uganda's ambitions to position itself as a regional technology hub. The UN's criticism added another layer of pressure. While the organization has limited enforcement power, its statements carry symbolic weight. They influence donor conversations, diplomatic engagements, and media narratives. For governments seeking international legitimacy, being publicly rebuked on election conduct is rarely welcome. Uganda's allies responded carefully, calling for restraint and dialogue. Some emphasized the need to respect national laws. Others quietly expressed concern. The language was diplomatic, but the unease was visible. As election day unfolded, the absence of the internet reshaped the experience. There were no viral videos from polling stations, no real-time tallies shared across platforms, no immediate fact-checking of claims. Instead, results and reports filtered out slowly, mediated by official channels and traditional media. For supporters of the government, this was presented as proof of stability. For critics, it was evidence of control. The UN reiterated its position, urging Uganda to restore connectivity and reaffirming that digital access is essential to democratic participation. Rights organizations echoed the call, warning that normalizing shutdowns risks setting dangerous precedents. When connectivity was eventually restored, the online reaction was swift. Posts, images, and testimonies flooded timelines, filling the silence left by the blackout. By then, however, key moments had passed. The episode left lingering questions. Will international pressure deter future shutdowns, or will governments continue to prioritize control over connectivity? Can institutions like the UN shape digital norms in an era of rising nationalism? And what does democracy look like when the switch can be turned off? For Uganda, the answers remain unresolved. What is clear is that internet blackouts are no longer invisible acts. They are noticed, measured, and contested far beyond national borders. The UN's response signals that the digital dimension of elections has become impossible to ignore. As more countries head to the polls in an increasingly connected world, the battle over who controls the flow of information is likely to intensify. Uganda's blackout, and the global reaction it provoked, may be remembered as another moment when that struggle came into sharp focus. As the hours passed and official results began to emerge, the absence of real-time digital verification continued to shape perceptions both inside and outside Uganda. In previous elections, citizen journalists armed with smartphones had streamed vote counting, uploaded images of tally sheets, and shared first-hand accounts from polling stations across the country. This time, much of that parallel record simply did not exist. What remained was a vacuum, filled largely by official statements and delayed reports. For the United Nations and other international observers, this gap underscored a growing concern. Elections are not only about the act of voting, they are about confidence in the process. Transparency, visibility, and independent scrutiny are now deeply intertwined with digital access. When that access is cut, even temporarily, it alters the balance between state authority and public oversight. Uganda's Electoral Commission insisted that the process was orderly and credible. Officials emphasized that polling stations opened on time, security forces were deployed to maintain calm, and voting proceeded without major disruption. State media echoed these assurances, portraying the election as peaceful and well-managed. Opposition figures told a different story. With limited ability to communicate, many relied on press conferences, radio interviews, and statements relayed through international media. They alleged intimidation, restricted movement, and irregularities that they said would have been more easily documented had the internet remained online. The blackout, they argued, was not merely a precaution but a strategic advantage. The UN stopped short of declaring the election invalid, but its language remained pointed. By framing the shutdown as a violation of democratic norms, it placed Uganda's decision within a broader global debate about governance in the digital age. That framing matters. It shifts the conversation from local legality to international legitimacy. For Uganda's government, the calculation was familiar. Leaders have long argued that maintaining stability in a diverse and politically sensitive country sometimes requires firm measures. They point to the dangers of online incitement, coordinated unrest, and the rapid spread of false information. In this view, temporary restrictions are a small price to pay for peace. Yet critics counter that stability enforced through silence is fragile. Research by independent institutions has repeatedly shown that internet shutdowns often fail to prevent unrest and can even exacerbate it. When official information is scarce, rumors thrive. When people cannot communicate, anxiety grows. And when economic activity is abruptly halted, resentment builds. In Uganda, the economic toll of the blackout became clearer in the days that followed. Telecom operators reported significant revenue losses. Small traders who rely on mobile money struggled to conduct business. Online freelancers missed international contracts. Ride-hailing drivers were left idle. For a country seeking to attract investment and expand its digital sector, the message was troubling. The UN's criticism resonated with these economic concerns. In recent years, the organization and its agencies have increasingly linked digital rights to development. Connectivity is seen not only as a political issue but as an economic necessity. Interrupting it sends signals that ripple far beyond election day. Diplomatic reactions varied. Some Western governments echoed the UN's concerns, calling for respect for freedom of expression and access to information. Others adopted a more cautious tone, urging dialogue while avoiding direct confrontation. Regional bodies largely remained quiet, reflecting the sensitivity of criticizing a fellow government's electoral conduct. Within Africa, the response was mixed. Civil society groups across the continent expressed solidarity with Ugandans, warning that the normalization of election-related shutdowns threatens democratic progress region-wide. At the same time, some governments quietly viewed Uganda's actions as understandable, even instructive. The tension between control and openness is not unique to one country. For young Ugandans, many of whom form the backbone of the opposition support, the blackout reinforced feelings of exclusion. This is a generation raised on connectivity, accustomed to expressing itself online, organizing through digital platforms, and engaging with global conversations. Cutting off that access during a pivotal political moment felt personal. Diaspora communities amplified these sentiments. Ugandans abroad, free from the blackout, became conduits for information, sharing reports, statements, and analysis. Their voices helped keep the issue alive internationally, ensuring that the shutdown did not fade quietly once connectivity returned. When the internet was finally restored, the backlog of stories poured out. Videos recorded but not uploaded, photos saved but not shared, testimonies delayed by days suddenly appeared online. By then, however, the initial impact had been blunted. Momentum had shifted. The election had moved on. For the UN, the episode reinforced a growing sense of urgency. As more countries head into election cycles, the organization faces pressure to move beyond statements toward clearer standards. Some advocates are calling for stronger international agreements that explicitly prohibit election-related shutdowns. Others argue for targeted consequences, such as linking digital rights to aid or trade considerations. Uganda's government has shown little sign of reconsidering its approach. Officials maintain that sovereignty includes the right to regulate communications in the interest of security. They argue that external actors often underestimate the local realities faced by governments in politically charged environments. This divide reflects a larger global struggle. In an era where information moves instantly and narratives can shape outcomes, control over connectivity has become a powerful tool. Governments wield it cautiously, but deliberately. International institutions push back, but with limited leverage. The result is an uneasy standoff, played out election by election. For Uganda, the immediate political outcome is settled. The longer-term implications are not. Repeated shutdowns risk entrenching skepticism about electoral credibility. They strain relationships with donors and partners who prioritize governance reforms. They complicate efforts to brand the country as open for business in a competitive regional landscape. At the same time, they reveal the limits of international pressure. Despite criticism, Uganda proceeded with its strategy, confident that consequences would be manageable. That confidence may encourage others to follow suit. The UN's intervention, then, is as much a warning as it is a condemnation. It signals that the world is watching, that digital silence is no longer invisible, and that elections conducted in the dark will be questioned in the light. As debates continue in diplomatic corridors and policy forums, the voices of ordinary Ugandans linger beneath the analysis. For many, the blackout was not an abstract issue of rights or norms, but a tangible disruption to daily life and civic participation. Whether future elections will unfold differently remains uncertain. What is clear is that the battle over the internet has become inseparable from the battle over democracy itself. Uganda's election eve blackout and the UN's sharp response mark another chapter in that unfolding story. And as nations grapple with the challenges of governing in a hyperconnected world, one lesson stands out. In modern elections, who controls the signal can matter as much as who counts the votes.